Last spring, I did something my children called completely insane. I checked myself into a nursing home. Not because I was sick, not because I had nowhere else to go. I went because I wanted the truth. I'm 86 years old. I live alone. And for years, I've warned people about places like that. Friends, neighbors, even strangers at the grocery store. I always said the same thing. Do not move into a nursing home unless you have absolutely no other choice. But one day, I realized something uncomfortable. I had strong opinions about a life I had never actually lived. So I decided to find out for myself. 3 days, room 12, 3rd floor, one small window facing a brick wall. I packed a small suitcase, brought my own blanket, and handed over my freedom at the front desk without fully understanding that's what I was doing. I ate the meals they served. I followed their schedule. I sat where they told me to sit. And by the second night, I understood something that frightened me more than aging itself. There were truths inside that building nobody talks about. Not the advertisements, not the staff, not even the families who visit for 1 hour on Sundays and leave believing everything is fine. And there were 3 discoveries that changed the way I think about growing old forever. The first thing I noticed was the waiting. Everyone was waiting for something. Waiting for breakfast. Waiting for medication. Waiting for someone to help them stand up. Waiting for visitors who sometimes never came. I met a man named Robert in the hallway my first morning. He was fully dressed at 8 a.m., sitting in the same chair when I passed again after lunch. I asked him what he was waiting for. He smiled and said, "My daughter said she might visit today." Might. That single word sat heavier in the room than silence. The second thing I discovered was loneliness. Real loneliness. Not the kind people imagine when they think of being alone at home. This was different. You could be surrounded by people every minute of the day and still feel completely invisible. At dinner, I watched residents eat entire meals without speaking a single sentence. Not because they couldn't speak, because nobody spoke to them first. One woman dropped her fork, and it stayed on the floor for nearly 10 minutes before anyone noticed. 10 minutes may not sound long until you're the person staring at the floor, wishing someone would see you. And then came the third discovery, the one that stayed with me long after I left. Most people there were not dying from illness. They were dying from surrender. Little by little, they had given up making decisions, given up being needed, given up believing tomorrow would be different from today. And once a person stops feeling useful, something inside them begins to disappear long before the body does. On my final night there, I couldn't sleep. I sat near the window, watching cars move through the parking lot outside. People going home, living normal lives, choosing when to eat, when to sleep, where to walk. Simple freedoms I had stopped appreciating years ago. That's when I realized something important. Growing old is not what scares people most. What scares people is losing control of their own life, one small piece at a time, until someone else decides everything for them. When my children picked me up the next morning, they laughed and asked, "So, was it as bad as you thought?" I looked back at the building before answering, and I said something they did not expect. No, it was sadder. The first thing I discovered was this. The loneliness inside a nursing home is completely different from the loneliness of living alone. When you live alone, the silence belongs to you. Maybe you chose it. Maybe you're simply learning how to live with it. But it is still yours. And if you want to escape it, you can. You can call someone. Go for a walk. Turn on music you actually enjoy. Open a window and listen to the world outside. But inside that building, the loneliness felt different. It was shared, and yet deeply private at the same time. 40 people in the same hallway, eating at the same tables, watching the same television, and somehow every one of them still seemed completely alone. Not because the staff were cruel. Most of them were kind people doing exhausting work. But there are only so many hours in a shift, and only so many residents needing attention at the exact same moment. The second thing I learned was this: losing small decisions destroys something inside a person faster than illness ever could. What time you wake up, whether you want the curtains open, what you eat for breakfast, whether you feel like talking today, or simply want silence. Those things sound small until someone else begins making every one of them for you. Then suddenly you understand they were never small at all. They were pieces of your identity, the architecture of a human being. On my second morning there, I watched a man named Bernard trying to explain to a nurse that he didn't want sugar in his coffee. She was kind. She was also rushing between 6 different people at once. Before Bernard finished his sentence, she had already moved on. He stared at that cup of coffee for a very long time afterward, and I remember thinking that moment was never really about sugar. The third thing I discovered stayed with me long after I came home. The people doing best inside that building all had one thing in common. They still had something that needed them. One woman had taught herself knitting at 84 years old and spent her afternoons making scarves for her grandchildren. Another man wrote handwritten letters every single week to old friends he had known for decades. And there was a woman, 91 years old, who proudly managed what she called the book table. It was just a tiny cart filled with used paperbacks. But she organized every book carefully and recommended stories to anyone walking past. Those people carried themselves differently. They had not disappeared into the routine. They still had purpose, something pulling them forward into tomorrow. On the third morning, I packed my suitcase and waited for my daughter to pick me up. At breakfast, I saw Gloria again. She looked up as I walked in, and I could tell she remembered me. So I sat beside her for a little while. Before leaving, I asked her a simple question. What do you miss most? She answered immediately, my kitchen. Not her neighborhood, not even her garden, her kitchen. The familiar weight of her own pans, the smell of her own coffee brewing in the morning, the exact way sunlight entered through her window. Small things. But when she described them, I realized they were never small to begin with. When I hugged her goodbye, she held on a little longer than I expected. And during the drive home, my daughter asked me what I had learned. I told her this: independence is not a luxury. It is not something people protect because they are stubborn or proud. We protect it because losing it changes a person faster than anyone admits. Losing the ability to make your own choices, your own routines, your own quiet little rituals, that changes who you are. And I learned something else too. The people who hold on to themselves the longest are the people who still have something unfinished, something that still needs them: a garden, a grandchild, a stack of letters, a small cart of books in a hallway, anything. Because the nursing home does not begin the day you move into one. It begins the day you stop feeling necessary. I'm 86 years old. I still live in my own house. I make my coffee whenever I want. I sit in my own chair beside my own window. And after those 3 days, I came home with something unexpected. Not fear, clarity. So find the thing that keeps you connected to life. Protect it carefully. Show up for it every morning, because in the end, that may be the very thing that keeps you in your own kitchen for as long as possible. That is the truth I went looking for.